Hello, everyone. Can you all hear me? You just need to unmute yourselves, the left most far mic. Can everyone hear me?
Hello.
Hi, Venerable.
Hi.
Sarah, can you hear me?
Oh,
And,
Venerable
Yes,
sir.
I can.
and Bhante, can we hear you?
Ayya.
Yes, I
Hello,
see.
Venerable.
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. So we're all good to go.
Very good.
So welcome
Excellent.
to the panel discussion on Buddhism in the time of COVID. I'd like to first start by introducing our panelists tonight. So Venerable, please forgive me if I don't say it properly, Venerable Galkande Dhammananda, who is head of the Wapola Rahula School for Buddhist Studies. He is also a full-time lecturer for the Department of History at the University of Kelaniya. Welcome, Bhante. We have Sarah Napthali, who is author of the very well-known book Buddhism for Mothers, which has been translated into multiple languages in many countries. She is a Dharma practitioner, social worker, and a human rights activist, and maybe a bit of an existentialist. Welcome, Sarah. Okay. And then we also have Bhante Sujato, a monk of 25 years who ordained at Wat Pa Nanachat in the Thai forest tradition. He has founded Sutta Central, which is an online platform to make all Buddhist teachings and sutras as much as possible available for free. He's also the ex-abbot of Santi Forest Monastery and an ex-rock star. So welcome, Bhante. And I should add, he was also instrumental in helping revive the full ordination for bhikkhunis in the Theravada tradition, along with many other people. So welcome, everybody. So we've had some pretty intense Dharma talks tonight. And I was just thinking maybe people need to just take a moment to breathe and regain a sense of equanimity. And, you know, because I think you can only really hold the knowledge of suffering if you've built up a certain level of peace and stability of mind and equanimity. And when you have that self-care and that sense of equanimity and peace and well-being, when you can see beyond to the deathless or the spacious moments between thoughts, then you have a greater capacity to hold your own and others' suffering. And I think a lot of people are suddenly locked with their own mind, whereas they're used to going out and doing whatever they want and running away from that. I have a few questions before we open it up to the panel, to the attendees. What has this pandemic brought to the forefront of your mind in terms of what the world needs to do to become more resilient for the futures we face? Is our current systems serving us? How can we act with more compassion and wisdom? Would anyone like to go first?
Sure, I'll go first if nobody else is talking. Why not? Hi, Ayya. You can hear me okay? Is that all right? The volume level is all right?
It's
okay,
wonderful.
Very good. Okay. Are our systems serving us? Well, to a greater or lesser extent. I mean, I certainly think that the response is exposing the flaws in many of the systems around the place. Obviously, in a country like, say, the United States, we've seen a disastrous response, especially from the federal government. In Australia, the response has been, I think, you know, not too bad, all things considered. Nobody knows what they're doing, and we were all unprepared for it. We shouldn't have been, but we were. As you know, Ayya, we've discussed these kinds of issues many times over the years, and I very much see this pandemic as part of our war and destruction of the environment generally. Just seeing some photos just now from India where we can see people taking photographs from the Punjab and seeing the Himalayas in the distance. And they're like, nobody's seen this for a generation. Children have grown up and become adults and have families without ever seeing this. And now we realize that the Himalayas are just over there. And something about this is telling us that we have lived way out of balance.
Venerable Galkande, could you perhaps say something about the lesson of this pandemic of living with more wisdom and compassion?
Well, yes. What Venerable Sujato shared, we see that the other living beings, they are coming out without fear, and that is one thing. And the other thing, the foods that here in Sri Lanka, we are confined to a monastery for a few weeks now. And around us, there are about, 2 jack trees and coconut, and then breadfruit, and then, the mango. And the environment around us prepared to protect us for another 2 months without going out for food. That much the environment is, we never, thought that until it was closed down, and then, how much the environment, the trees and other things protect us. And there are so many things that, as Venerable Sujato pointed out, even in my presentation, what I tried to say, we were destroying the whole environment to, out of the craving. And so what I like to tell you that this has given so many messages, so many learnings to come back to our roots and to think afresh. And here in Sri Lanka, this closing down everything for a few weeks now, and it is new and no one was prepared for that. So we are a little bit worried about those poor people, whether they get enough food, and those are the areas that we have to think of. And and this has a stronger message for us to be kinder, to caring, and that is how I see.
Thanks, Bhante. Sorry, I'm also managing questions that are arising. So just an invitation to people attending the conference to put your questions in the Q&A box in the middle of the toolbar at your Zoom driver's thingy down the bottom. So I think this is a very unprecedented thing, certainly for people who weren't alive to see the Great Depression or the Second World War, or perhaps the Vietnam War. And many people are facing restrictions on their ability to go outside. They're not able to do a lot of the things that they derive well-being from, and a sense of identity. So, as we've also mentioned, some positive things are coming out of it as well, in terms of, a slower pace of life. We're given an opportunity to pause, to examine how we're really living and what we most deeply value. Perhaps more time with friends and family, and a simpler way of life, that maybe we don't necessarily want to go back to the way things were before, when we were consuming way beyond what we can, what the planet can sustain. But in terms of, how can we employ, how can we deal with the anxiety and the fear of being surrounded by so much suffering, fearing for our loved ones, especially perhaps our elderly friends and relatives, and people who are immunocompromised? How do you think we can deal with that kind of anxiety and learn to manage our minds while we have no external way of running away? We just have to sit at home and look at our own mind. Is there some things you could suggest to deal with that kind of anxiety, Sarah?
Yeah, something that always helps me enormously, like even pre-COVID, if I feel like, mental health might be on the decline into some self-pity or some anxiety, gratitude is just so powerful, and it's also the springboard to generosity. It's so much easier to be generous when you've got a really good realization of how lucky you are. And let's face it, in Australia, I know not everybody listening is in Australia necessarily, but I'm sure every country could apply this in some way. We have so much to be grateful for, because it is not anywhere near the scale that it is in other places. And I do feel really grateful for some time at home, more time to meditate, more time with your loved ones, more time to just attend to the things that get neglected. It's quite surprising if you sit down and list the things that you're grateful for. You might have a goal of coming up with 3 things. You can tend to come up with about 15. So it's a bit corny, but a gratitude journal is a really good idea.
Yeah. Are there any other life hacks that you can suggest for surviving the pandemic, surviving lockdown, creating well-being, and employing self-care in this time, Bhante Sujato? Or if you want to add, something else that you want to discuss. You're on mute, Bhante.
You muted me.
It was magic. I unmuted you.
Oh, there you go. Okay. So I'm not muted now, am I? Excellent.
You're not.
Excellent. So life hacks. I mean, I to be honest, I mean, being a kind of a monk is like a lifetime's preparation for a life of self-isolation and pandemic. And I personally am busier than normal and am doing a lot more contact with people than I normally would, mostly virtually. So it hasn't really been a thing for me. But it's very much to do with personality as well. I mean, just myself, my own personality type, ever since I was a kid, I've just loved being alone. I don't know why, but I just love to be alone. I love to just go off and just be by myself. And I mean, I don't mind being with people. Sometimes they're okay, in small doses, but generally speaking, I'm very happy to be by myself. So yeah, I'm happy here, and I'm very, very so lucky to be with my dear friend Venerable Akaliko, and we sort of have a lot of laughs and try not to take things too seriously. And I know that sometimes when I'm giving Dhamma talks that I can be very serious, depending on the context. But also, I think it's important to keep a light heart and to not be afraid to just sort of be a bit silly sometimes.
Yes. Okay. So somebody asked, in these times, the poor are disproportionately affected, especially daily wage laborers in developing countries like India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, and so forth. Bhante Dhammananda, could you perhaps, and sorry, just to finish, the person who said that they felt that some Buddhists were closing their hearts towards donations for these people and just focusing on things like chanting when something more serious was required, that they were displaying a lack of practicality and compassion. Bhante Dhammananda, could you perhaps say something about the Buddhist responsibility to respond in a practical way in times of hardship for humanity?
Yes, here what we see, the two sides, that one is chanting and promoting meditation to prepare to face the situation, and at the same time practically engage helping people. And that is what we can see in Sri Lanka today. Most of the regional, not in the city but in villages, monks are very much engaged with collecting things and to distribute among those people who are lack of food and other facilities. They are in the that you can see. And in fact, during the tsunami time, even before the government start its work, it was the religious institutions, not only Buddhist but every other Buddhist institutions, become the centers of shelter for those who were, lost their houses and all that. And for 3 days, it was those monasteries and the Buddhist communities were the people who looked after those affected. When the government started their mechanism and all the other organizations come into action. And even here, it was difficult, and initially, it was difficult for the government to stop Buddhist monks starting people, collecting, gatherings to start their work, because that was the practice before. In this situation, they cannot gather people because it is dangerous. But it took time for the Buddhist institution to understand it is dangerous to get together and organize things. And here, that this is practically happening in Sri Lanka, and I don't know much about other countries how it is working, but it is here. So being mindful about the danger, if we come together, and that's if we break the social distance, and then that will affect, that will help to spread the disease, that we have to be mindful, but keeping the distance and to start the work. That is what the go forward and to help people. That is part of our practice. And yes, it is not that to be confined to one place and not to do something. It is happening, and it is happening. We can see that.
Yes, I think there are many things people can do, in a way. Staying at home is an act of kindness to people whose health is compromised. They say that a person who goes out could spread it to up to 300 or 400 people in a month. So I don't know if that's true, but it's pretty serious. And I think while we're at home, there are many things we can do to manage our well-being, such as having a routine, exercising, also, this is your chance for retreat. Lots of people always tell me, Ayya, I'd love to be a nun. I'd love to be a monk. I want to do a 3-year retreat in a cave. Well, this is your chance. This is your COVID cave. Cave in the snow? No, cave in COVID. And, start with a simple meditation, breath meditation, calming your mind. And, there are so many meditations we can do that are right effort, right mindfulness to develop states of virtue not yet arisen, to maintain and continue states of mind that have arisen, such as loving kindness and reflecting on the virtue that we've done, people we may have helped, people we've loved and cared for, reflecting on the qualities of the Buddha, reading about the life of the Buddha. And somebody said, while we're at home, we can't actually physically go out and help anybody. So how can we help? Does anyone have any suggestions?
With all the technology abounding, there's many ways to reach out to people. And it can just be a good idea to think through all the people you know and ask yourself, could any of them be lonely? Could any of them appreciate someone checking up on them? Especially elderly people and people who live alone. I mean, the UK had a minister for loneliness even before COVID, and every country probably could have. So how much more loneliness is there now? I mean, I've just read The Plague, so I've got loneliness on the brain. That's something that's quite easy to be helpful around.
Yeah, to stay in touch with friends and family. and
Yeah.
perhaps form a neighborhood group asking if elderly members of the area need someone to shop for them.
Mm.
Yeah. And, you know, maybe there are some elderly people also who don't connect with technology so easily. So finding ways that maybe they could, I don't know, that's a little hard, but we do what we can.
Ring
So-
him up.
Exactly. I'm not sure if we should wrap up soon, but yeah, perhaps, you know, how can we, how has your, maybe perhaps in closing, I can just ask one more question. How has your Buddhist practice prepared you to cope with this pandemic? And how does it help you envision a more joyful or just world after the pandemic? Bhante Sujato? Oh, we have 30 minutes to go. Okay, that's good.
30 minutes. Just to check, Ayya, are we taking questions from the participants as well?
We are. So a lot of the questions, half of the questions I've asked have been from the
Okay.
attendees.
Okay.
So if you have more questions,
Okay.
people, please ask.
Okay. Okay. Good. Thank you. Yeah. I mean, it's not that it's difficult to think of something. It's just that the whole of the Buddha's teachings and the Buddha's path is for this. It's about how to be happy, to be independent of those kinds of physical circumstances. But I would say, let me put it this way: any kind of spiritual path or undertaking that we take must be grounded on solid foundations. And so I think one of the how do I put this? One of the I always don't want to say flaws, but one of the I'll just say flaws. One of the flaws in the way that many people approach the Buddhist path is to sort of leap over into the very profound dhammas, or to want to try to attain nibbana, or these kinds of things. And we're worried about meditation and these very elite practices. Whereas actually Buddhist practice should be grounded on things that are very, very simple, like right speech. How do we talk to people? Right speech means speaking to people clearly. This is a big deal in our current age, right? We have to communicate over these devices. How do we employ right speech when doing a video conference? To communicate clearly, to communicate compassionately, to communicate truthfully and with integrity. These are some of the starting points. Also, that right action, like you were just saying about looking after people in your environment, in your community. And one thing that I would say there is, I would encourage people to look out, especially if there's women's shelters or women's refuges locally. And we just visited our own local women's refuge the other day to bring them some extra food and things that we have. And they were so grateful for it, because they're having a huge spike in domestic violence and a huge spike in people calling upon their services. And often people don't realize that in a developed country like Australia, there are many people who are going without food, who don't have anything to eat at the end of the day, who can't feed their family. So if you have any extra food, any extra supplies, contact your local women's refuge or community centre and see if there's a way that you can help out there. I think, like you raised the question earlier, Ayya, that some people say Buddhists just do a lot of chanting and they're not helping in practical ways. I think that's a perspective that comes from a lack of perspective on the Buddhist tradition. As Venerable Dhammananda pointed out, the grounded everyday practice within the villages in Sri Lanka, and as I've seen in Thailand, and I'm sure in all Buddhist countries, is very much applied on the ground, working with people and working with the community. That's the Buddhist tradition that I've seen and that I've sort of grown up with. And so I think that we, especially as Western Buddhists, non-traditional Buddhists, who, we're interested in shunyata, and we're interested in paticcasamuppada, and we're interested in all of these things, we need to pay more attention to how communities work in a village, how people develop networks, how people can actually get things done in a way that's very resilient and can last for a very long time. Let's not forget that the village is a sustainable unit of human civilization. They've lasted for thousands of years in so many different countries, and they work. How do villages work? How do people pull these things together? How can we bring those skills to our own context?
I think it's quite important now more than ever for our spirituality to be actualized, whether it's in managing our own mind, but also how we interact with others and what information we pass out, because our communal well-being is tied together. So somebody's asked quite a long question, but I think it's a good one, so I'll read it. This is for the panel, and especially Bhante Sujato, who spoke about accepting the reality of world suffering. I'm curious about distinguishing between avoidance and self-care. Sometimes I find the suffering of the world overwhelming and paralyzing at the moment, and I stop watching and listening. I suspect initially it's motivated by self-compassion, but then it's easier to remain detached and maybe it becomes avoidance. Any thoughts or comments, please? So Venerable Dhammananda, would you like to take this one?
Basically, the Buddhist teaching, as Venerable Sujato pointed out, that three things: the anicca, dukkha, anatma, that the suffering is the and I think the other presenter also, I'm sorry, Sarah,
yeah,
pointed out that the impermanence and the suffering, it is the basic teaching. But it doesn't say that since everything is impermanent and then the unceasingly changing, and we cannot change that. We don't have any role to play, be away, something like that. It is not that. Loving kindness, compassion, and intervene is part of our practice, and that is, even in my presentation, that is what I try to bring from here: how to make a better society, how to make a better world for poor people who are working very hard, still they don't get enough. And then how, kind of just society, less suffering. There are suffering that we cannot avoid, we cannot stop, but there are things that we can help each other, care each other, and to have a kinder world. As I pointed out, our countries, our governments, they have enough arms and weapons to fight with each other. If you compare India and Pakistan, they have enough weapons to fight for months and kill thousands of people. And in those countries, you see poor people, they don't get enough food, and they are the most affected people in this context. And now the weapons and armed and military, all these things are to protect something. And while spending so much of money for weapons, people are dying without food. And what are you going to protect if people are dying without food? And why can't we come together? And why we need weapons? Let's look after our people and
sadhu.
Yeah.
That is why, one more thing. That is why I think this COVID is something that we can think of to start something better. When the tsunami attack came to Sri Lanka, we thought this is a starting point for us to think afresh. But what happened? The tsunami attack came to coastal area, and the central area of the country people were, they did not affected. And most of the people in the other countries, they did not affect. Here, the whole world, and rich and poor, royal and so this is something for whole world to wake up and to start a fresh journey, fresh world, a kinder, caring, and that is what I see. This is something, a kind of calling for us to start something anew, and that there we can contribute a lot from Buddhism.
I think our lives have been radically simplified by being locked inside, and it also is an invitation to just kind of look at who we really are without all of our trappings, because a pandemic is a great leveler of privilege. We see that everybody is vulnerable to death, old age, sickness, loss, grief. It's a cause for compassion. I guess the way that, it's easy to become overwhelmed by the suffering of the world, but that's when you go back in and practice self-care and touch, check in with your sensations in your body and your emotions, and go back to your breath and recover some equilibrium, and when you've recovered, and doing practices that soothe the mind, and when you've recovered a little bit of peace, you've taken care of yourself, then you need to remember that others are your second self, that our well-being and the well-being of others are intimately connected. So to care for others is in effect another form of self-care. What we do to the earth will come back to us, will come back to our children. So caring for the earth, caring for the most vulnerable among us, is also caring for ourselves, because if people are suffering, it creates social instability, creates ill health, it creates war and conflict, which affects everybody. So we are in fact intimately connected, and happiness is not just a personal matter, it's a communal matter. That is why part of our self-care regime should be making your heart as wide as the world. So somebody else asked, how can we influence through this opportunity our governments to reprioritize spending on more people-centric needs than defense, military, etc.? Sarah, would you like to take on that one? They're in California, by the way.
What was it? How can we influence our governments to
reprioritize spending on more people-centric needs than the military?
Gee,
very American question.
I have to say, I'm kind of stumped, because those kind of things come through grassroots group action, and we're not in a great position to do that at the moment, although I guess we are doing a lot virtually. Yeah, look, I really can't think of an answer off the top of my head to that one. It's a big one. It's an important one.
Yeah. Bhante Sujato, do you have any seditious thoughts?
Oh, many seditious thoughts, Ayya. I mean, in part following up from the question from Rita, the last question, just the idea of avoidance versus confronting suffering. I mean, I know, I just want to say that I know exactly what you mean. And it's a huge kind of deal, and it's something that I struggle with. For myself, my method, but my path a number of years ago, I realized that I'd given up hope. And so since then, things have got a lot easier. It's a lot easier to not have to struggle with the burden of maintaining hope. Things are pretty crap. They're probably going to get worse, and we're going to have to learn to live with it. Meanwhile, it turns out that that giving up hope is not the same thing as despair. Giving up hope means that our actions have some other form of motivation. So for me, I'm not motivated any longer by the idea that, maybe I'll be empowered and I'll make a difference. I'm motivated by the idea that I don't want to be the kind of person that would just sit by and watch all of this happening and not do anything about it. That's what gets me going. Whether we succeed or not is out of my hands. Don't be afraid of some creative avoidance, but know that that's what you're doing. Enjoy life, smell the daisies. Nobody's asking us not to have a good life just because other people are suffering. And it's important to remember why we're doing all of this and why we care. Avoid as much as you need to, and then get back in the trenches and make some trouble for those who deserve it. As for reorganizing society in a more people-centric way, look, absolutely, I would love it for that to happen. Our lifetimes, growing up in the 80s and the 90s, we've seen the triumph of economics as the economic sphere has basically swallowed up successively, our government institutions, our infrastructure, our social organizations, our religions, and it's all kind of consumed by the power of the dollar. We need to reverse that, and we need to realize that there is a reason why we don't make everything about the dollar. There's a reason why economic systems are there to serve people and not the other way around. The more that I know that as a monk and as I get older, I'm supposed to get more kind of mellow and more conservative. But to be honest, the older I get, the more anarchist I get and the more radical I get. These days I look at Karl Marx, and he said property is theft, and I think, what a wimp. Property isn't theft, property is murder. Every time that you buy something from the shop, something dies. And this is one of the messages. We know the story of the Bodhisattva watching the plow of the rice. When we look at that, we see the plow turning up the field. And to us, it looks like this kind of bucolic, idealistic, agrarian culture. But the Bodhisattva sitting under the tree meditating saw the animals who were being killed, even by such a supposedly innocent thing. And so everything that we do has its toll in death. Every piece of plastic that we use, everything that we buy from the shops, everything that we consume pays a price in death. And our economic system is designed and created to insulate us from that, so that we can enjoy the benefits of it without experiencing the costs. So this needs to change. This is the fundamental thing.
Thanks, Bhante. Somebody mentioned that forgiving third world debt, writing to your government to forgive third world debt would be a good start. I think
Absolutely.
Probably once pandemic is over, who knows when that will be, joining Extinction Rebellion, joining movements to save the planet, to redistribute wealth amongst the less privileged, also soup kitchens, organic farming, eco-villages, educate, agitate, organize, because the structure of society is based on the worker, so actually we should never underestimate the power of a small group of people to change the course of history, because all revolutions only need 3.5% to start. And I'm not advocating a violent revolution or anything like that. I'm advocating a wise, compassionate, and peaceful revolution. But, being a citizen is a duty. It requires engagement.
Right.
What are the politicians you've elected? What decisions are they making on your behalf? Watch what they're doing, because what did the American government do while we were all in isolation? They ripped away environmental protections as a start.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So, and for a democracy to flourish, there needs to be educated people watching what the government is doing. But anyway, somebody has also said, Bhante Dhammananda, can you tell us a little bit of the situation in Sri Lanka, how the pandemic is affecting vulnerable people or people in general?
Well, here the movements, people's movements were restricted, and government is they took very strong measures to stop people's movements, and now almost almost 3 weeks, almost 3 or something like more than 2 weeks, the curfew is enforced, and in certain districts without, it is continuously curfew is there. And in some areas from 6 a.m. to 2 p.m. curfew is lifted for people to buy things. And airport is closed, and government has developed a mechanism to send food or food items to the people to buy from their houses, and hospitals are prepared to receive more, when if the number goes out, then to protect. And so far we see kind of there is no sudden increase of patients. It is like something like 200 so far after 1 month, and 6 people passed away, those who had other health issues as well. So people are very much aware now, and they are following the government's instructions, and they are using all the media, WhatsApp, all these, they are educating people. So this is what we are seeing here. Schools are closed down for about a month now. Universities are closed. And yes, government officers are, not functioning. The people are working from their houses. That is the situation here.
Thanks, Bhante. I know things in India, where I run a charity, have been quite bad as well. People were given 4 hours to scramble to get enough food before they're pretty much locked in their houses. Cruel landlords continue to charge rent to workers, which force them out of the city. Some people walking up to 200 kilometers because the government, lacking foresight, stopped the buses and trains. Some people died on the way. People are now locked in their houses without any source of income, or the food the government's offering is not reaching people. And that's why our charity is sending, and a lot of Buddhist charities are sending food to those people. So somebody asked, what simple message would you give to our children on what they can do, even as a child, to shape the future post-COVID for everyone's benefit? Sarah, would you like to take on this one?
For some reason, the first thing that popped into my head was on a walk I went on today, I saw a little letter to the postman that some child had put on their letterbox saying, thank you. So I guess teaching children that there's so many great people out there looking after us, that the nurses in the intensive care units who are just taking so many risks, and there's so many people to be thankful for who are doing the right thing and taking care of us throughout this crisis.
Okay. Was that like a message you would offer to children and for a more optimistic future post-pandemic? I don't know. It's a difficult one, isn't it?
Yeah. So sorry. Yeah, I probably haven't answered that question specifically. I guess, I mean, I noticed Play School was teaching mindfulness.
Right.
So, it's a great time to brush up on children's meditation skills. Do guided meditations with your children, and meditation is something that they can take into their life after the pandemic.
Yeah. Something that I've gathered working with children with trauma is to not talk about what's going on is actually not a good thing. Like, we think we want to protect our children from what's going on. But I found that actually discussing things with children in a way that they can understand, to alleviate their anxiety, to tell them, okay, this is what's going to happen. As far as we know, it may change. And this is what we're doing to stay safe, and right now you have shelter and you have food and mum's here for you. Talking about it is actually quite helpful, and helping children to understand their emotions around it, which, as you said, mindfulness would be wonderful for that. Yeah. So also, Bhante Sujato, somebody asked that could you mention something about equanimity, which is so essential in the development of the 4 Brahma Viharas, loving kindness, rejoicing, and so forth.
Sure. Again, I'm so sorry to do this, but can I comment briefly on the previous question as well?
It's not allowed. Not allowed. No,
it's not allowed. Oh, okay. All right. Just on the briefly on the previous question about how do we talk to kids. I was reminded many years ago. I watched the documentary "Bowling for Columbine" by Michael Moore. About school shootings in America, and at one point everybody was blaming Marilyn Manson, the rock singer, for all of these shootings, saying these kids were inspired by it. And so Michael Moore interviewed Marilyn Manson and asked him, what would you say to the victims of this shooting? And Marilyn Manson thought about it for a minute and then said, I wouldn't say anything. I'd want to hear what they had to say. And of all the responses in the whole documentary, his was the most thoughtful and considered. And I think it's really important with the kids that we really listen to what they're saying and stop dismissing them and stop treating them as if they don't know what they're talking about. There's a reason why the OK Boomer has become the meme of our time. We have failed them. Our generation has failed them. We've created this world and we've created these problems because of our greed and our blindness and our stupidity. And I was there, I was part of it. And who are we to tell our kids that we have the solution? You know, we've seen in this, some time ago in Florida, you saw all these kids who were partying and getting together, acting like completely irresponsibly, ignoring all of the scientific advice and authorities and endangering the lives of their elders with the coronavirus. And we think that's so terrible. But then you think, what about the elders who are completely ignoring all of the authorities, endangering the lives of all of their children when it comes to climate change? We're supposed to be the responsible ones, and yet we've acted irresponsibly. So we need to start listening to what our kids are saying, and when they tell us about their anxieties for the future, we need to realize that those are real. They're not just making things up. Their fears for the future are genuine and meaningful. Sorry, I forgot the second question. You had another question for me. I forgot.
The role of equanimity in the four Brahma
equanimity,
Viharas.
right. Yeah, in the four Brahma Viharas, right. So equanimity is about knowing when you can't do anything. So being able, sometimes, you're stuck here. There's so many things going on, so many things you need to do. But equanimity is just that sense of knowing, okay, I'll be there when I'm needed. And not to sort of force yourself into situations, but to be able to, like we translate it as equanimity, but the actual Pali word ubeka literally means to watch over something. And so equanimity isn't to ignore it and pretend it doesn't exist. Equanimity is to watch over it and to be ready to help when need be. And the wisdom is to know that time to sit back. That's why it's always important that equanimity be developed alongside metta and compassion and mudita, rejoicing, because otherwise it can tend to become indifference and hard-heartedness.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, this pandemic has created a lot of fear and anxiety for many people, but it's also had some positive effects in some areas, where sometimes hard times bring out the best and most altruistic in people, because suddenly the economy is not really running, and everybody is like we're living more simply, in a way. So we're thinking more in terms of, some people have become incredibly benevolent and made food packages for people, or some landlords have stopped charging rent. I actually heard some things our Prime Minister said for the first time and thought, actually, I respect you for saying that, which is something I don't always feel.
Crazy.
So, that kind of, there's a groundswell of compassion and goodwill and people recognizing what is most important, rather than just living their life chasing money and living a very heedless, busy life, where they don't have time for what's most important. Somebody asked, how can we maintain that that mindset of focusing? Sometimes when you're going to die or death is close by, you realize you're mortal, you're just the same as everybody else. how can we maintain this sense of compassion and momentum and, you know, living by what we most deeply value that sometimes hard times bring out in us? How can we bring that out in non-Buddhists after the pandemic passes? Bhante Dhammananda, would you like to have a go at that one?
Yes. Basically, the this COVID situation is new, and it has given a name, and but we already knew things are impermanent and things are happening, and that in that process something has come up, something new. And for us, those who knew that things are changing, and this is not something to be a surprise or something to be panic, and we are ready to accept what is coming. And if things are impermanent and things are bound to be changed, and then what need to be, to practice, what we highlight, the live in the present moment. And we don't know what happened next moment, but we know how to be happy in this moment, not so. This is what I personally like to share. Be in the present moment, make the present moment happier, make the present moment meaningful, and that is only that we have the present moment. So and we can show that we are not afraid, and we are ready to face whatever comes next, because we are, we know things are changing and it is nothing to worry about. So this is what from my practice, I can share.
Thank you, Bhante. That seems like a very good closing remark. Before we wrap up, would everyone else like to just briefly say something?
I was going to add something to the that prior question about how you can take some of the good stuff you're getting into the post-COVID world, and that's just to consider your routine, because I think practicing the Dharma when you're living modern lives, it's about having some good habits in place. And so think about, should I be rejoining a Sangha, joining a Sangha, implementing some meditation as part of my day, setting up a good Dharma library so that I can make it part of every day. So yeah, find a way to make it part of your routine and commit to that.
Thank you. Bhante Sujato?
Look, no, I'd just like to say thank you to yourself, Ayya, and to Bhante Dhammananda and to Sarah. It's been a really enjoyable panel, and also to say thanks to all of the people who've made it possible, especially Deepika, who had the idea, Radha offering support, and Damit, as we know, who's doing all of the tech support. And for those of you outside of Australia, just in case you're thinking that the IT and technology in Australia must be good, I think we're currently nudging out Tajikistan for our broadband speeds in Australia. So trying to get all of this done and all the videos uploaded and everything has been a real job of work for Damit especially. So thanks so much for helping out and making this possible.
Okay, thank you so much, everyone. I'd just like to finish by saying cultivate peace and weaponize optimism. Make those an island for yourself so that you have the resilience to face everything that's going on outside. Cultivate that inner eye of the storm. Thank you, everyone. All the best.